The Valorian warship Fang of Korath cut through the darkness of space like a blade through flesh, and Commander Ryketh stood at the bridge with his claws digging into the armrest of his command chair. He was a massive creature, standing 8 feet tall with silver-gray fur that was marked by countless battle scars. His yellow eyes glowed in the dim light of the bridge, and his pack of warriors moved around him with perfect discipline. The Valorians were the apex predators of the known galaxy, and every species knew to fear them. "Commander, we have detected a distress signal," his second-in-command Vorath announced. The old warrior's voice was calm but curious. "It comes from a human cargo vessel in the neutral expanse." Ryketh let out a low growl. Humans were weak creatures in his mind. They had no claws, no fangs, no natural weapons of any kind. How they had survived long enough to reach the stars was a mystery to him. They were soft and fragile, barely worth the effort of conquest. "What interest do we have in human problems?" Ryketh asked with a dismissive wave of his massive paw. "The ship appears to be abandoned, Commander," Vorath replied. "Salvage rights would be ours if we claim it first." Ryketh considered this for a moment. Resources were always valuable, and the neutral expanse was lawless territory where anything could be taken without political consequences. He was about to give the order to ignore the signal and continue their patrol when the ship's bioscanner operator suddenly jumped up from his station. "Commander!" the young warrior shouted with shock clear in his voice. "You need to see this immediately." Ryketh strode over to the scanning station with heavy footsteps. The operator's hands were shaking as he pointed at the screen. At first, Ryketh did not understand what he was seeing, but then the truth hit him like a plasma blast to the chest. There was a Valorian life sign on that human ship. Not just any Valorian life sign. The genetic markers matched his own bloodline. His heart began to pound with a force he had not felt in many cycles. It could not be possible, and yet the scanner never lied. "Lyris," he whispered, and his voice cracked with emotion he had kept buried for 3 long lunar cycles. His daughter had been taken from him by rival pack raiders during a territory dispute. They had demanded payment for her return, and Ryketh had gathered everything he owned to meet their price. But the exchange had gone wrong when a third party attacked, and in the chaos, Lyris had vanished. He had searched for her across 12 systems. He had torn apart pirate stations and interrogated countless criminals. Every lead had ended in nothing. His pack had gently suggested that he accept the truth that his cub was gone forever. But here was her life sign, faint but steady, aboard a dying human vessel in the middle of nowhere. "All alphas to the boarding craft now," Ryketh roared with a voice that shook the walls of the bridge. "We intercept that ship in 10 minutes." The Fang of Korath accelerated to its maximum speed. Every second felt like an eternity to Ryketh as he suited up in his combat armor. His mind raced with terrible possibilities. Was this a trap set by his enemies? Were they using his daughter as bait to lure him to his death? Or, worse, had the humans done something to her? He would kill every single being on that vessel if they had harmed one hair on her head. The human ship grew larger in the viewport as they approached. It was called the Meridian Star according to its hull markings, a medium-sized cargo transport that had clearly seen better days. Scorch marks covered its outer plating, and one of its engines was completely destroyed. This ship had been attacked, and attacked badly. "Life support is failing on the human vessel," Vorath reported from beside him. "They have perhaps 6 hours of breathable air remaining. Then we do not waste time," Ryketh growled. The boarding craft latched onto the Meridian Star with a loud clang that echoed through both ships. The Alphas formed up behind their commander, 12 of the most elite warriors the Valorian Dominion had ever produced. They had conquered planets and destroyed fleets, and now they prepared to assault a broken cargo ship. Ryketh activated the breaching charge, and the airlock door exploded inward. The alphas poured through the opening with their claws extended and their fangs bared. They expected resistance, traps, or ambush. They found only silence and death. Human bodies littered the corridors, victims of the attack that had crippled the ship. The emergency lighting cast everything in a dim red glow that made the scene even more horrific. Whoever had attacked this vessel had shown no mercy. "The Cub's signal is coming from the crew quarters at the end of this corridor," Morris said quietly. Ryketh moved forward with his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. What would he find at the end of this hallway? Would his daughter be alive, or would he discover that the scanner had given him false hope? He did not know if he could survive losing her twice. The door to the quarters was sealed, but it was no match for Valorian's strength. Ryketh ripped it from its frame and threw it aside like it weighed nothing. What he saw inside froze him in place. His warriors gathered behind him, and one by one, they too became still as statues. None of them could speak. None of them could move. They could only stare at the scene before them with complete disbelief. Nothing in their long history of conquest had prepared them for this moment, and nothing would ever be the same again. The room was small and simple, just a standard crew quarters with a narrow bunk and a few personal belongings scattered about. The emergency lighting cast a soft red glow over everything, and the air was cold enough that Ryketh could see his own breath. But none of that mattered, because all he could see was his daughter. Lyris lay on the bunk wrapped in a thick thermal blanket. Her small form rose and fell with steady breaths, and her silver fur was clean and well-groomed. She looked healthier than Ryketh had dared to hope, and his heart swelled with relief so powerful it nearly brought him to his knees. Then he noticed the human. A female human lay beside his cub. Her body curved around Lyris in a protective position. One arm was draped across the small Valorian like a shield, and even in sleep, the human seemed ready to defend the child. Her other hand rested near Lyris's head as if she had been stroking the cub's fur before she fell asleep. The human was injured badly. Dried blood matted her dark hair, and bruises covered her face and arms. Her clothing was torn and dirty, and she was clearly exhausted beyond normal limits. Yet she had positioned herself between Lyris and the door, between the cub and any threat that might enter. What stunned Ryketh most was not the human's presence, but Lyris's reaction to it. His daughter's small clawed hand gripped the human's shirt tightly, holding on to the fabric like it was the most precious thing in the universe. Lyris's face was peaceful and calm in a way Ryketh had not seen since her mother died 2 years ago. "This is impossible," Voreth whispered from behind him. Ryketh understood why his old friend was confused. Valorian cubs were born with strong predator instincts that made them extremely hostile to other species. They could not sleep in the presence of non-pack members because the vulnerability was too dangerous. Their bodies would not allow it, keeping them alert and ready to fight or flee at any moment. A Valorian cub sleeping next to an alien, especially a species as strange as humans, should have been biologically impossible. Every instinct Lyris possessed should have kept her awake and aggressive. Yet here she was in the deepest sleep Ryketh had ever witnessed, curled up against a human female like she was pack. "How is this happening?" one of the younger alphas asked with genuine confusion in his voice. No one had an answer. Ryketh moved closer to the bunk very slowly. He did not want to wake either of them yet, because he needed time to understand what he was seeing. The human female's breathing was shallow and weak, and up close he could see that her injuries were severe. She had been through something terrible, and yet she had still placed herself as a barrier between Lyris and the world. The protective position was one Ryketh recognized because Valorian mothers used it when guarding their young. The human had instinctively placed her body where it would take any attack first. She had made herself a living shield for a child that was not her own and not even her species. "Commander, what do we do?" Lorith asked quietly. Ryketh reached down and very gently touched his daughter's head. Lyris stirred slightly at his touch and let out a small sound of contentment. Then, without waking, she snuggled closer to the human beside her. The action made Ryketh's throat tight with emotion. His daughter trusted this human completely. Trusted her enough to sleep deeply beside her. Trusted her enough to seek comfort from her, even in the presence of her own father. What had happened on this ship to create such a bond? "We take them both to the medical bay," Ryketh decided. "The human is injured and needs treatment. Both of them?" Another Alpha questioned. "Commander, she's just a human." Ryketh turned and fixed the warrior with a stare that made the younger male step backward in fear. The commander's yellow eyes blazed with a warning that needed no words. No one would question him again on this matter. "I want to know everything that happened on this ship." Ryketh continued in a voice that allowed no argument. "Search the vessel for survivors and check the computer logs." "I want answers." The Alphas moved quickly to obey. Two of them carefully lifted the human female from the bunk, and she groaned. Softly, but did not wake. Her body was so light in their arms that it seemed wrong humans really were fragile creatures. When they moved her away from Lyris, the cub's eyes snapped open immediately. She let out a cry of distress and reached toward the human with both arms, her claws extended in panic. "No!" Lyris screamed. "Give her back. Do not take her away from me." The sound of his daughter's voice after so many cycles of silence broke something inside Ryketh. Tears he did not know he could still produce began to form in his eyes as he knelt beside the bunk. "Lyris," he said softly. "Little one, it is me. It is your father." Lyris turned to look at him, and recognition slowly filled her golden eyes. For a moment, she simply stared at him like she could not believe what she was seeing. Then she threw herself into his arms with a force that nearly knocked him over. "Father," she cried into his chest. "You found me. You really found me." Ryketh held his daughter tightly and let his tears fall freely. His warriors pretended not to notice because even the mightiest Alpha was allowed to weep when reunited with lost family. He had his cub back, and nothing else mattered in this moment. But even as she embraced him, Lyris kept looking toward the human female being carried away. "You have to help her, father," Lyris begged with desperation in her young voice. "She saved me. She kept me alive. You have to save her now because I cannot lose her." Ryketh looked at the unconscious human. This small, fragile creature who had somehow earned his daughter's complete devotion. Who was she, and what had she done to create such a powerful bond? "Tell me everything," Ryketh said to his daughter. "Tell me what happened here." And Lyris began to speak. The medical bay of the Fang of Korath was built for Valorian warriors, so the human female looked tiny and fragile on the large examination table. The ship's healer worked quickly to treat her injuries, while Commander Ryketh watched from the doorway with his daughter in his arms. Lyris refused to let her father put her down, but she also refused to take her eyes off the unconscious human. Every few moments, she would ask if the woman was going to be okay, and every time Ryketh assured her that the healers would do everything possible. "Her injuries are serious, but not fatal," the healer reported. "She has 3 broken ribs, a fractured arm, and severe bruising across her entire body. She also shows signs of extreme dehydration and malnutrition. Will she survive?" Ryketh asked. "She should make a full recovery with proper treatment," the healer confirmed. "Though I must say, Commander, it is remarkable she lasted this long in her condition. She should have collapsed days ago." Ryketh looked at the small human with new eyes. She had pushed through pain and exhaustion that would have stopped many warriors he knew. Perhaps humans were not as weak as he had always believed. It took several hours before the human finally opened her eyes. When she did, she found herself surrounded by 8-foot-tall wolf-like predators with sharp fangs and glowing eyes. Any normal person would have screamed in terror at such a sight. But the human did not scream. She sat up quickly despite her injuries and looked around the room with urgent eyes. Her first words were not a plea for her own life or a question about where she was. Instead, she asked a simple question that silenced everyone in the room. "Is the little one safe?" Ryketh stepped forward with Laris still clinging to his neck. The moment the human saw the cub, her entire body relaxed with relief so obvious it was almost painful to witness. She let out a long breath and smiled despite the cuts on her face. "Oh, thank goodness," she whispered. "She is okay. She really is okay. Myra." Laris called out and reached toward the human with both arms. The human Myra opened her arms without hesitation, and Ryketh found himself passing his daughter to her before he could think about what he was doing. Laris wrapped herself around the human and buried her face in Myra's shoulder, and Myra held her gently while stroking her fur with careful fingers. "I was so worried," Myra said softly to the cub. "When I woke up alone, I thought something bad had happened to you. Father found us," Laris explained happily. "He came to rescue us just like you said he would." Ryketh watched this exchange with growing confusion and curiosity. His daughter had been kidnapped by ruthless criminals and held prisoner on a dying ship. Yet she seemed completely at ease with this human stranger. The bond between them was obvious and deep, and Ryketh needed to understand how it had formed. "I have questions," he said in a firm voice. Myra looked up at him without fear. Her brown eyes met his yellow ones steadily, and she nodded. "I imagine you do." Ryketh ordered everyone except Vareth to leave the medical bay. When they were alone, he sat down in a chair that was almost too small for his massive frame and fixed the human with his most intimidating stare. It was a look that had made hardened criminals confess their crimes immediately. Myra did not even flinch. "Tell me everything," Ryketh demanded. "How did you come to have my daughter?" Myra took a deep breath and began her story while Laris remained curled in her lap. "The Meridian Star was a cargo vessel," she explained. "I was an ensign, the lowest rank, just trying to earn enough credits to send home to my family. We were carrying medical supplies through the neutral expanse when the pirates attacked." Her voice grew heavy with sadness as she continued. "They killed most of the crew in the first assault. I survived because I was in the cargo hold checking inventory when the attack began. I hid among the crates while the pirates took what they wanted. And Laris?" Ryketh pressed. "I found her locked in a cargo container," Myra said. "The pirates must have been using our ship to transport her somewhere, maybe to sell her or maybe to hold her for ransom. I do not know their plans because they all died when part of the hull exploded." She looked down at Laris with such tenderness that Ryketh felt his heart ache. "When I opened that container, she was terrified," Myra continued. "She was starving and dehydrated and so scared. She tried to attack me at first because she did not trust anyone." "How did you calm her?" Ryketh asked. He knew how aggressive a frightened Valorian cub could be. "I sat with her," Myra said simply. "I did not try to touch her or force her to trust me. Listen, I just sat nearby and talked to her in a soft voice. I told her stories about my home planet and sang songs my mother used to sing to me. It took 2 days before she would let me come close." "You stayed with her for 2 days when she was trying to hurt you?" Vareth asked with disbelief. Myra shrugged as if this was completely normal behavior. She was a child who was scared and alone. "What else could I do?" Ryketh leaned forward with intense interest. "The ship was dying. The life support was failing. Why did you not take the escape pod and save yourself?" Myra looked at him with genuine confusion. "And leave her behind? She would have died alone in the cold and the dark." "I could never do that." "But she is Valorian," Ryketh pointed out. "We are not allies of humanity." Some would even call us enemies. Myra held Lyris a little tighter and shook her head firmly. She is a child, Myra said. That is all that matters. I do not care what species she is or what politics exist between our peoples. She was scared and alone and needed someone to protect her. I was there, so I protected her. That is what you do for children, any children. That is what makes us human. The room fell silent as Rykith processed her words. This small, fragile creature had chosen to die rather than abandon a child of another species. She had given Lyris her food, her water, and finally her own body heat when the cold came. She had expected nothing in return, and had not even considered any other choice. Rykith had conquered planets and led armies to victory, but he was not certain he could have done what this human had done. You are either the bravest being I have ever met, he said slowly, or the most foolish. Myra smiled at him with warmth in her eyes. Maybe I am both, she replied, but I would make the same choice again without hesitation. The council chamber of the Fang of Korath was filled with tension as the Alphas gathered to discuss the fate of the human called Mira Chun. Commander Rykith sat at the head of the long table while his warriors argued among themselves about what should be done. She saved the commander's daughter, one Alpha stated firmly. We owe her a debt of gratitude and should reward her generously before returning her to her own people. She is human. Another warrior countered with a dismissive growl. Gratitude is one thing, but we cannot allow this situation to complicate our relations with the Dominion. Give her credits and send her on her way. And what of the cub? A third voice asked. Lyris has formed an attachment to this human that concerns me greatly. It is unnatural for a Valorian child to bond with another species so completely. The arguments continued back and forth while Rykith listened in silence. He had not yet shared his own thoughts because he was still wrestling with a truth that he found difficult to accept. By ancient Valorian law, Mira had performed an act called Shelker, the sacred rite of pack protection. When a warrior risked their life to save a cub of the pack, they were granted full membership in that bloodline and the eternal gratitude of the family. It was one of the highest honors a Valorian could receive. But Myra was not Valorian. She was human, a species most Valorians considered barely worth acknowledging. Invoking Shelker for her would be unprecedented and would certainly cause controversy throughout the Dominion. Enough! Rykith finally roared, and the room fell instantly silent. I have heard your arguments, and now you will hear mine. He stood and walked slowly around the table, making eye contact with each of his warriors in turn. For 11 days, that human woman kept my daughter alive, he began. She gave Lyris her own food until she had nothing left. She gave Lyris her own water until her body began to fail from thirst. When the cold came and the ship's heating died, she wrapped her body around my cub to keep her warm, knowing she herself might freeze to death. The Alphas listened with growing respect in their eyes. She did not do this for reward or recognition, Rykith continued. She did not even know if anyone would ever find them. She expected to die on that ship, alone and forgotten, and she made peace with that fate. But she refused to let my daughter die with her. He stopped pacing and faced his pack directly. Tell me, how many of you would do the same for a human child? The question hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. The warriors looked at each other uncomfortably, and several looked away in shame. None of them spoke because none of them could honestly say yes. Old Vorath, the ship's lorekeeper and Rykith's most trusted advisor, rose slowly from his seat. His gray fur was marked by age and wisdom, and when he spoke, everyone listened. I have studied our ancient laws for 60 cycles, Vorath said calmly. The rite of Shelker does not specify that the protector must be Valorian. It speaks only of the act itself, the willing sacrifice of one's life to protect the cub of the pack. By every measure of our law, this human has fulfilled the requirements. but she is not one of us." A young alpha protested. "Perhaps that makes her sacrifice even greater," Vorith replied. "She had no obligation to our pack, no loyalty to our bloodline, no reason to care whether Lyris lived or died. And yet she chose to protect her anyway. She chose a child she did not know over her own survival. That is not weakness. That is strength beyond anything I have witnessed in my long life." The council fell silent again as they considered these words. Later that evening, Ryketh visited Mira in the quarters she had been given. She was sitting by the window watching the stars pass by while Lyris slept peacefully in the bed nearby. The cub had refused to rest until Myra promised to stay close. "May I join you?" Ryketh asked from the doorway. Mira nodded and gestured to the empty seat beside her. The commander sat down heavily, his massive frame making the chair creak under his weight. "I need to ask you something," he said quietly so as not to wake Lyris. "And I need you to answer honestly." "I will try," Mira replied. "Why did you do it?" Ryketh asked. "Not the surface answer you gave before, but the real reason. Why did you choose to die for a child you did not know? A child of a species that has never shown kindness to your people?" Mira was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was soft and thoughtful. "On my home planet, there is a story we tell children," she began. "It is about a time long ago when humans were scattered and divided into many different groups. These groups often fought each other over land and resources and believed that those outside their group were enemies." She turned to look at Ryketh with steady eyes. "But one day, someone realized that a child crying sounds the same in every language. A mother's love looks the same in every culture. And fear in a young one's eyes is universal. That person decided that some things are more important than the lines we draw between ourselves." She glanced at Lyris, sleeping peacefully in the bed. "When I saw your daughter alone and terrified in that dark container, I did not see a Valorian. I saw a little girl who needed help. I saw someone's child who was scared and hungry and desperate for comfort. How could I possibly walk away from that?" Ryketh felt something shift inside his chest, a belief he had carried his entire life beginning to crumble. "I have conquered 12 systems," he admitted slowly. "I have defeated enemies that most warriors would flee from. I have always believed that strength was the only thing that mattered in this universe." He paused and shook his head. "But you have shown me a different kind of strength. The strength to choose compassion when cruelty would be easier. The strength to sacrifice everything for a stranger. I do not fully understand it, but I know it is real." Myra smiled gently at him. "That is the secret about humans," she said. "We are not strong in the ways that are easy to see. We cannot run as fast or fight as hard as other species. But we feel things deeply, and we care about things beyond ourselves. Sometimes that makes us do impossible things." Ryketh sat with her in comfortable silence as the stars streamed past the window. And in the quiet of that moment, he made his decision about what he would do. The great hall of the Valorian High Council was an ancient place filled with the statues of legendary warriors and the banners of noble bloodlines. For thousands of years, the most important decisions of the Dominion had been made within these walls. But nothing had ever happened here quite like what was about to unfold. Commander Ryketh stood before the assembled council with Mira Chung at his side. The human looked impossibly small, surrounded by hundreds of towering Valorian nobles, but she stood straight and proud without any trace of fear. Lyris clung to Myra's hand and refused to let go, her golden eyes daring anyone to try to separate them. "This is unprecedented," the High Elder declared from his elevated throne. "You ask us to invoke Shellker for a human? The sacred right of pack protection has never been granted to an outsider in all our history." "Then history changes today," Ryketh replied firmly. "The law is clear, and this human has more than fulfilled its requirements. She risked her life to save my daughter when no one else would or could. She chose death over abandoning a Valorian cub. If that does not qualify for Shellker, then the right has no meaning. Murmurs spread through the gathered nobles. Some were outraged at the suggestion, while others seemed intrigued by the unprecedented situation. The debate that followed was fierce and lasted for hours. Those who opposed the motion argued that granting pack status to a human would weaken Valorian identity and make them appear soft to their enemies. They spoke of tradition and purity and the importance of maintaining boundaries between species. But those who supported Ryketh told a different story. They spoke of honor and courage and the true meaning of the ancient laws. They argued that rejecting Myra would be a greater shame than accepting her, because it would mean their traditions were hollow. Finally, old Vorith rose to speak one last time. "I have served this council for longer than most of you have been alive," he said with the weight of decades in his voice. "I have seen us conquer worlds and defeat powerful enemies. I have witnessed the best and worst of what our people can be." He pointed at Myra with one gnarled claw. "This human woman did something that shames us all. She cared for a Valorian child with a devotion that many of our own warriors would not show. She gave everything she had, her food, her water, her warmth, and nearly her life for a cub that was not her blood and not her species. And she did this without expecting any reward." He looked around the hall at his fellow nobles. "If we reject her, we are saying that species matters more than honor. We are saying that our ancient laws apply only when it is convenient. We are saying that we are too proud to acknowledge true courage when we see it. Is that who we want to be?" The hall fell silent, and then the High Elder rose from his throne. "Let the vote be taken," he commanded. One by one, the nobles cast their stones, white for approval and black for rejection. The counting seemed to take forever, and Ryketh felt his heart pounding with each stone that fell. Mira stood beside him with quiet dignity, accepting that her fate was in the hands of beings she barely knew. "The vote is final," the High Elder announced at last. "By a margin of 2-1, the council approves the invocation of Shellker for the human known as Myra Chun." Lyris let out a cry of joy and threw her arms around Myra's waist. The human lifted the cub into her embrace and held her close while tears of relief streamed down her face. She had not realized until that moment how much she had been hoping for this outcome. The ceremony that followed was ancient and sacred. Ryketh spoke the ritual words that bound Myra to his bloodline forever, and Myra repeated the vows that made her pack. A special mark was placed on her right hand, a small symbol that identified her as protected under Valorian law. When it was done, Miracham became the first human ever granted full pack status in the history of the Dominion. The news spread across the 12 systems like wildfire, and the reaction was immediate and intense. Other species whispered about what had happened. They talked about the soft, fragile humans who had no claws or fangs or natural weapons. They wondered how such a weak species had managed to move the mighty Valorians to break their oldest traditions. Some said it was luck and others said it was politics. But those who knew the true story understood something different. They understood that humans possessed a strength that could not be measured in muscle or weaponry. In the months that followed, Mira became a permanent fixture in Ryketh's household. She could have returned to human space with riches and honors, but she chose to stay because Lyris needed her. The bond between them had grown too strong to break, and neither of them wanted to be separated. The cub, who had been traumatized and feral, slowly healed under Mira's patient care. Lyris began to smile again and laugh again and trust again. She slept through the night without nightmares, but only when Myra was nearby. The healers said the attachment was remarkable and unlike anything they had seen before. One evening, Ryketh found Myra teaching Lyris to read human star charts in the observation deck. The cub was curled up in Mira's lap, and both of them were laughing at some joke he had not heard. The sight filled him with a warmth he had not felt since his mate died. An alpha warrior approached him quietly and asked a question that Ryketh had been asking himself for months. "Commander, what do you see when you look at that human?" Ryketh watched Mira gently correct Lyris's pronunciation of a difficult word. He saw the patience in her eyes and the love in her touch. He remembered finding her on that dying ship, curled around his daughter like a shield, willing to die rather than let a child face the darkness alone. "I see the most dangerous species in the galaxy," he said finally. The warrior looked confused. "Dangerous? She is so small and weak." Ryketh shook his head slowly. "No, you do not understand. They make you love them without even trying. They care about things that should not matter to them, and they make you care too. They look at a universe full of predators and somehow see family. And before you know what has happened, you find yourself changed." He turned to face the younger warrior directly. "We Valorians conquered 12 systems through strength and violence. But humans, they conquer in a different way. They conquer through kindness and sacrifice and love. And I am no longer certain which method is more powerful." The warrior considered this for a moment. "Is that not a threat to us?" he asked. Ryketh smiled, something he had rarely done before Mira entered his life. "Perhaps," he admitted. "But I am no longer certain that is a bad thing. My daughter is happy again because of that human. My pack has learned that courage comes in many forms. I have discovered that my heart is not as hard as I believed. Are these not good things?" He looked back at Myra and Lyris laughing together in the starlight. "The galaxy has always known Valorians as conquerors and warriors," he said softly. "But perhaps it is time for us to learn what humans have always known. That protecting the innocent and loving the weak is the greatest strength of all." And in the observation deck, unaware of the conversation happening nearby, a human woman and a Valorian cub continued to map the stars together, two unlikely souls bound by a love that had changed everything.